Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This intro's for YouTube basically. Please remember that this talk will go up on a projected screen with me talking along, so the video clips are in 4:3 aspect. So on your screen they'll probably have a black line down each side. That's deliberate, that's so that it fills the screen on the night, as they say. So this is the bit where I'll actually do my own introduction on the night. As I said, this introduction is just for YouTube. And well, let's see how this hangs together. Comments are welcome, as always. So let's get going. Good evening and welcome to my grow room. Before we start, I've got a drink. Have you? Oh, what a shame. But before we get going on the dendrobiums, these are some plants that are in bloom that I possibly could have brought along to the meeting, but there was too much going on to bring plants in. This is a spike that started growing and carried on growing and carried on growing and carried on growing and is now nearly a metre long. Well pleased with that. Wildcat, Bobcat, that one. Yeah, a good spike. And then this Zygopetalum hybrid, was probably a Zygonesia in reality, but it goes to show that the immature growths produce the spikes which grow alongside. And got two nice spikes on this plant. Not too keen on the colours, but this had a purpose, this one. So that's that one, and this one Derek would be proud of. He was into his old-fashioned Odontoglossums. I've got no name for this one. It came from Burnham's, bought in bloom. It's got another little spike pushing on down here, but typifies the Odontoglossum types with their shape, their sort of clown patterning, and lovely pink tinge on the lip on that one. Lovely blooms. Right, on to the dendrobiums. Okay, while I chat about the Nobile hybrids and how I take these into winter, we'll have a chat about their annual life cycle while we look at some pictures of Nobile types I've either still got or have had. Pretty blooms. Yeah, so these, if we start in spring you will get your nodes bursting into life and you will get your spikes forming, followed by the buds forming, and sometime during this period you'll also get some new growths along, although on some of them it may be later. So your blooms will come and go, your new growths you push hard through that growing season. So you feed and water well, grow them on strong. During this time they don't need bright light. Good light, but not bright light. They'll get away with not having it, and that's important for later. So as you come to the end of the growing season, your canes should have finished growing. We'll have a look at what they look like, and you go into autumn winter where you reduce your watering down, you reduce your feeding down to 0, hopefully reduce your night temperatures, and the most important thing is give them the brightest light you can. Subtly different from their growing season, and that's the bit that triggers a good blooming on a Nobile type hybrid. So some of the plants then, they have a typical shape. They often have a zigzag thing going on with the canes, alternate leaves, and this one's been grown on from a relatively small division. And this is the important bit at the end of the growing season. The new canes will produce a terminal leaf. And to me, they're obvious because they stick up a bit more than the alternate leaves which stick out sideways. So this is an old cane. You can see the nubbins where the flower spikes are going to be. They're already starting to swell. And, you know, we haven't even hit December yet. But they do take a while to form and then push on and get their buds. So this one is currently finished growing. Yeah, it's got its terminal leaf on its latest growth and is currently resting. So no feed and a little bit of water now and again for that one. This one is a mounted one. This is a Comet King. This was given to me as a tiny little keiki, and I've grown it on. It produced a couple of flower spikes last year off the latest growth at that point. You can see it's grown on, you know, and getting bigger each time. So yeah, a couple of flower spikes there that that was spring last year, and then it may well grow, bloom farther down. Now this is the latest growth, and this is only just finished growing. Yeah, so I'm only just reducing this down now. Again, you can see the swellings where the flower spikes will come in the spring, not yet, but they will start to swell as the winter progresses. Now with the Nobly hybrids, you can actually get some biggies. This isn't one of them. But the important thing here is they don't all behave. You can see the old flower spikes on the older canes, and eventually the canes will become deciduous, lose all their leaves. There's one here in the process of losing its leaves. It's doing autumn. But this is the latest growth. So this one's not behaving because it's still growing. This cane is still in active growth. So this one is not yet being rested. That still gets a drop of feed now and again, and some water. It's even got an active root system. We've actually got roots growing in the pot with green tips. So this one is still growing. So the last thing we want to do is stop watering and feeding it, because that cane will stall. And then you've potentially lost its vigour and its strength. So that's that one. This is a big one. Now this one has taken over 2 years to get it to behave itself, because it kept maturing its canes sort of effectively nearer the summer rather than when it should do. So it was blooming at an odd time. Again, you can see the stumps where the blooms have been in the past. Now, some of these canes may bloom lower down come the spring, but these are the latest growths. Yeah. So again, terminal leaf. This cane has finished growing for the year. Yeah. And the other one round here has also finished growing for the year. So the two latest growths have completely finished growing. This is a resting Nobly type. It's not going to get any more food now until those flower spikes start to push out in the spring, and I mean really start pushing from the cane. And a trickle of water now and again just to stop those canes desiccating. And the next ones I want to chat about are endearingly called the Phalaenopsis type Dendrobiums. They have a similarity to the moth orchids. Now these are different, because these, where they would grow naturally, even though these are hybrids, are warmer growers. Yeah, and they don't get cold winters. They get a wet season and a dry season, but they don't get the major drop in temperature that some of the other Dendrobiums have to put up with. Mainly tropical rainforest type place. And as a consequence, in my place, these are kept quite dry in winter because they stop growing, because my temperatures drop down. And if they're not growing, the last thing you want to do is chuck a load of water and feed into the pot, because all you'll do is rot the roots. So these have a different care for me. I reduce the watering down and the feed to next to nothing. So let's have a look at some of these then. Now these, at first glance, might look a bit like Nobly types, but they're not. The distinct difference is where they bloom from. They're very leathery leaves on these, very succulent type leaves. But the spikes come from the top of the cane, not opposite the leaf nodes. And you can get multiple spikes at the top of a cane, on a good strong cane, on a healthy plant, and sometimes you'll get spikes pushing out farther down. Yeah, so this is another one. This one's currently in bloom, but this has been grown on from a young plant, so you can see the progression as the canes get bigger and bigger as time goes on. That's the cane that I bought it with, and I've grown a couple since then that have pushed on. This one's currently got a spike on it. It's not a good spike, only a few buds on that one, but that's its first rebloom for me since I got it. So some blooms are better than no blooms, I always say. Now this one came from Jeff's collection. And you might ask what the hell I'm doing with it, as it's a dendrobium, but Marius said it was effectively a duplicate or a not required, because it is a hybrid effectively. You can see again flower spike sticking out the top of the cane. This large cane here, this was there when I got it, you've got 3 spikes at the top of there, one out of the apex and then one either side a bit lower down. And then this cane here is the one I've grown, so this is my cane. This currently has a spike on it, at which point we might be able to find out what the hell it is, as the name it was given on the tag doesn't exist. If you Google a plant name and it comes back with no results, then it doesn't exist. Yeah, lovely, lovely, gentle purple striping on the canes on this one. The canes themselves are really attractive. That's really what attracted me to this one. So, wait for blooms to find out what it is. Now, another type of dendrobium that doesn't do particularly well for me, simply because, again, the Latoria types, typified by very thin at the base, fatter in the middle and thinner near the top. They have a distinctive shape to them. The 2 or 3 leathery leaves on the top, as opposed to the other 2 types we've looked at have leaves down most of the cane. And these again would grow warmer than my winter temperatures, so again they stop growing in the winter, and if they're not growing they get greatly reduced watering and no feed until the spring comes, when there is likely to be some new growth. This is the latest growth here that I've grown, so bigger than anything else on the plant, which is always good, and we may get some blooms on that one. But you know, as I said, you've got to adjust your care to the temperatures that you've got, and if it doesn't suit the plant, then you've got to do something different. Now, another type of dendrobium, which I am going to call the black hair types, because the actual name of the section they belong to I refuse to say. Work that out for yourselves. But these again, they're warmer growers. They don't get the cooler temperatures that they're going to have to put up with in my grow room. So again, they're going to stop growing in the winter, which for this one is a bit of a nuisance, because I've got 2 really strong canes pushing on here. So I've got to get a balancing act together here. I've got to try and keep those canes growing without the pot getting soggy, yeah, simply because it's growing so slowly, but it is actually growing. So that's good. And then this one came from Jeff's as well. Seems that everything I've got from Jeff just seems to go mad. Again, you can see where these bloom on the apex and then down the canes to a degree. You don't very often find any buds below a third of the way down, but they tend to bloom near the top of the canes. And the canes have, especially when they're young and when they're new, very, very fine black hairs, hence the sort of nickname. But you can see this cane here, it's still growing. It's in active growth, it's producing new leaves. So again, I've got to do a balancing act. I've got to keep that cane growing, but I mustn't let the media get soggy and wet in the low temperatures and short days. It'll just rot. Now a couple of true winter resters. If you don't treat these properly, your chances are you'll either get a poor blooming or none. Now look at the shape of that mount. This is important, yeah? Now if you can imagine the plant was like that during last winter, so the light came in from this end, yeah? And therefore this end didn't get anywhere near as much light. And guess what happened? This was covered in blooms and this didn't have hardly any. So the governing factor on getting this to bloom is not just the winter rest, it's the bright light. That's the trigger for the blooms. And to a degree the same applies to this one. This is Lindleyi. I'll accept the synonym of aggregatum, although it just seems silly to me when Mr. Lindley described it. But anyway, this has been grown on from a young seedling plant. I haven't had it too long, but I've had 2 years worth of blooms out of it. And it's completely resting. It finished growing about 3 weeks ago. There is no sign of life, and there's something you won't see. Both together. Now you can see the difference. You can see Jenkinsii is smaller, flatter, and Lindleyi tends to raise its canes away from its growing point and is a lot larger. So yeah, a comparison, as they're often thought of as very similar. Right, this is one of my long cane resting type dendrobiums. This is Dendrobium nesta. Although it's a hybrid, it still needs the same treatment. Deciduous, annually deciduous under good conditions. And this one got disturbed at the beginning of the year because I remounted it, and that set it back. So the canes are still growing. Yeah? So there's no way this is resting at the moment. This is still growing, albeit slowing right down because of the short days and everything. But yeah, and then it pushed out another late growth, which is even shorter. So I'm not sure whether I'll get a good blooming on this one next year, but we can but try. So bright light, cooler temperatures, and stop the feed and watering when the thing stops growing. Okay, let's have a look at some oddities then. This is a primary cross between Victoria Regina and Goldschmidtianum. Blooms on the deciduous canes. I've never had any buds form on the canes that have still got leaves on, but this one takes several years to drop its leaves. Now again, as far as going into winter is concerned, I completely ignore it on this plant because it continuously puts up new growths. And the canes grow, let's do in autumn, the canes grow for some considerable time. They don't just have a seasonal growth, they grow for longer than that. So basically this one gets fed and watered throughout the season, but obviously less in the winter because it will slow down. And there's just no point in feeding hard when the plants can't grow. They can't grow hard because we've got short days and you know, the temperatures are lower, so it's not in an ideal world. What else can we have a look at? So I'm trying to find oddities. Now this is Dendrobium tortilli. Now this one is a dryer in winter, not a true winter rester. Now these are the previous season's growths down here, and they've been grown on from a small plant basically, whereas this year's canes are much bigger and fatter. But they both canes have a terminal leaf. This plant has completely finished growing for the year. So this is currently being rested. No food and a trickle of water now and again when I feel like it. And if I see those canes starting to shrink back and desiccate, then it'll get a bit more water. But with my high humidity, it probably won't need it. I get away with watering very infrequently. And then we've got my real oddity, the biggie. Now this is Dendrobium hercoglossum. I've had this one a long time. It's grown into a pretty bit of a monster really, but it has a strange growth habit. You won't find many other orchids with a pattern like this. The canes can grow quite long, and they do eventually become deciduous, but that takes 3 or 4 years. Maybe as long as 5. But if you have a look at some of these long canes, they're still growing. Yeah? Well, those canes are 2 years old. But they're still growing. You know, this is an odd plant. Yeah? So, you know, you've got different sets of growth on here. And they're at different stages, but many of those stages are still in active growth. I mean, if you look at the very top of the plant, these are this year's new growths. And you know, they're still pushing on now. They will grow right through this winter, right through the next season, and probably on through the next winter as well. So you have to go, you know, keep this one going. Just keep pushing it on. Gently through the winter, but, you know, no rest for this. This gets, you know, ticking over all through the winter. So you get different layers. You get the oldest canes droop down the farthest, and then the next set of canes, and then the new canes up the top. They'll grow up and then they'll eventually hang over. So as I said, it's a bit of an oddity, and that's the important thing. Go with your plant, not with the season and not with what the books say. So there we go. That's my chat on dendrobiums. Hope you've enjoyed it. Some people may have learnt something. And as I said, I just hope you've enjoyed the chat and the style, the presentation style. It's not normal at an Orchid Society to get a presentation like this. And thank you very much. Any questions? And for YouTube only, straight into the sun. Well, we don't see it very often, do we? That's basically what will happen on tomorrow evening. You know, it'll have a different introduction, obviously geared up to where I am, and obviously it won't have this bit on the end, but I think it flows okay. I mean, you say what you think. I'm always open to comments, but you have to bear in mind it can't be changed now. It's set in stone, unless I've spelt something wrong, in which case I might redo it. But effectively, once it gets onto YouTube, it's like a single unit. So editing the parts is almost impossible. And if there is a spelling mistake in there, I might have to just apologise for it on the night, because to redo it is a pain. So that's it. That's what I'm going to run with. As I said, I've got 20 minutes. That's a little less than 20 minutes overall, which is good, because the chances are I shall waffle a bit at the beginning and explain what's going on a bit more than I did now. And don't forget, as I said, that's the 4/3 format, old-fashioned, like your old TV used to be. And when you watch an old TV programme, you wonder why it doesn't fit on the screen. It's because it's 4:3 ratio. And I've done that because that's the size of the screen it's going to get projected on, which means it can fill the screen. Unlike every other presentation we've had for many, many years, basically, which are widescreen format, and you either get bits dropped off the edge, or if the projectionist is on the ball, it gets reduced down to fit on the screen so that it's long and thin, and it's much, much smaller, so the detail's lost. So there was method in my madness. So we shall see how it goes. And yeah, I'm okay with it. I think it'll run okay. Say what you think. See you next time.